Tonight, I want to talk to you about one of the lowest points in my life, and I hope that it's helpful. When I left Oklahoma University in my undergrad program, I had no intentions of going to the NFL. As a matter of fact, I didn't even go to Oklahoma to play football. I went to Oklahoma to wrestle, and that's why I said, whoever booed me in the back, I will choke you out. I'm a three-time heavyweight All-American, and I was ranked 4th in the world, and I did beat up Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez. True story. So, if you booed, now would be the time to leave. But when I went to Oklahoma, I didn't go to play football. I went to wrestle, and I was actually just telling this story to a brother in the back because it's funny. He's a wrestling and football player. But I went there to wrestle, and one match, Barry Switzer, who's one of Oklahoma's great coaches through sheer willpower and cheating. I mean, we know who we are, right? We know who we are. He was guest coaching the match, and we were wrestling Iowa State. And the Iowa State guy, I knew he was scared already. I was a weird guy, and I would mess with people's heads on purpose. So I would stand at the corner of the mat and play with a yo-yo the whole time before the match. I didn't warm up, I didn't jump around, I didn't run or sprint, I'd just stand there and play with a yo-yo. So he was already freaked out. This is a true story. I had a bright orange yo-yo, and I'd just stand there and play with it, and just stare at whoever I was wrestling. I mean, how much would that freak you out if I was just standing there like this? You know. So I knew he was freaked out. And we line up on the line, and the first thing I do is smack his head as hard as I can hit it. And I knew the ref was going to blow the whistle, but I wanted him to know that this wasn't a game. So as soon as, whoop, bam, hit him, flat to his face. Referee blows the whistle, he's like, you do that again, you're done. I'm like, I did what I needed to do. And so after that, what is it? He's intimidated, and he's standing straight up for the rest of the match. So I caught him on the edge of the mat, and I blast doubled him. And if you're not a collegiate wrestling fan or a high school wrestling fan, you wouldn't know this, but we had cheerleaders too. But instead of standing up, they would sit around the mat, right? You're nodding your head, so you know what I'm talking about. So I double-legged this guy over the cheerleaders and into the stands. And Barry Switzer stands up, and I can't say exactly what he said because, you know, pastors don't cuss. And he said, that son needs to be playing football, as loud as he could say it in front of the whole room. And so from that day forward, I started playing football and loved the sport. And I had loved the sport my entire life. I was a little confused because I started off as a small guy and I was a running back, and then I grew 7.5 inches in 9 months. Yeah, very painful. And then went the other way. And I didn't know what I would do leaving high school, but I chose wrestling over football. And so to get there and now have the opportunity as an All-American wrestler to play football as well was incredible for me. And so I went on to play when we won the national championship in 2000, when we beat Florida State. We went to the Rose Bowl after that, and I fell in love with the game. But I had no desire really to go any further than that. I didn't think I would. I hadn't played long enough. I didn't know the position well enough. I was just a fast guy and a strong guy at a position that was uniquely inclined to wrestling. On the defensive line, all you do is wrestle until you get to the backfield. Now, I was made for this. But instead of trying to go into the draft, I instead started law school, and I spent a semester in law school. And Tommy Harris, who is a Chicago Bears great, for anybody who follows the NFL, he was a good friend of mine, still a good friend of mine. And he said, man, you should try to play. And so I said, well, I don't know if that's going to work for me. He said, man, you need to try to play. You're one of the best athletes I've ever known. You need to try to play. And so after the summer of 2004, I decided to throw my hat into the ring. And I had a few workouts. And one of those workouts was here in Atlanta for the Atlanta Falcons. So as much as you want to boo me, I actually love the Atlanta Falcons. And I hate that they can't finish a game. And it actually hurts me at a personal level to watch somebody give away 25 points to Tom Brady. I cried over that. I mean that. I was hurt. But I came here first. And I'm old school, so when I was with the Falcons, we were still working out at Furman University, right? But you all made a bad choice. You chose Jonathan Babineau instead of me. You see how that worked out for you. And so I got traded to the Saints after a very brief time with the Falcons. And after the Saints, I went to St. Louis, and then I came back to the Saints. And the lowest point in my life, emotionally, was tied to that venture. You see, without any warning, without any idea that it was going to happen, without any preamble, as it were, no phone call, no email, no nothing, I got cut from the New Orleans Saints. I was actually watching ESPN, and I saw my name scroll across the bottom of the screen. New Orleans Saints cut defensive tackle Leonce Crump Jr. And it was one of the lowest moments I've ever experienced in my life. Because even though I didn't set out to play in the NFL, I had locked my heart into that idea, and I had begun to make plans around that idea. As a matter of fact, I knew that I was eventually going to do the whole church thing, but I had my own idea in mind. I was going to play in the NFL. I was going to get my pension after about 5 or 7 years, because that's about the longevity of a career for a defensive player, especially in the trenches, because our bodies get beat up so much down there in the trenches. And I had worked out my entire story for the next decade. But here I am, sitting in my parents' house, watching ESPN, with no idea that my NFL career is about to be cut short, and that I was going to find out by watching television. A few minutes later, my agent calls me, and he says, "I'm so sorry I didn't get to you sooner." But when Sean Payton came in, he decided that he wanted to overturn the entire organization. So Sean Payton came in, Jim Haslett got fired. That's how I ended up at St. Louis, by the way, because Jim Haslett became the defensive coordinator there. But Jim Haslett got fired, the whole front office got fired, and over 70 players were cut, regardless of how they'd performed, regardless of how they'd done, regardless of their, quote, value to the team. Peyton wanted to come in and he wanted to do his own thing. And in that moment, I felt absolutely empty. And I didn't know I would feel that way. I didn't know that at some point, at some juncture in that narrative, from not playing football at all, though having an incredible love for the game, going on to wrestle at Oklahoma University and becoming an All-American in that sport, to moving toward football and becoming an All-American in that sport, to being an undrafted free agent in the NFL, I didn't know that at some point I had tied my entire identity to being an NFL football player. I didn't realize that at some point I could not separate who I was from what I did, from what I was able to produce, from what I was able to manufacture, from my stats, from my number, from the status that came with being a part of the NFL, from the status that came with making that type of money. Listen, the first time I saw that NFL contract, I knew God was real. I had never seen so many zeros in my life. And I made plans around those zeros. And I carved a future around those zeros. And because I'm a genuinely good person, I even made plans to give away some of those zeros. So I thought, surely God will be satisfied, because I don't want to keep it all for myself. I'm going to buy a Bugatti. And I'm going to tithe the rest. Somewhere along the way, my identity, my person, got wrapped up in my production. Somewhere along the way, who I was as a man, who I was as a person worthy of love, who I was as a human being who has something to contribute to the world, who I was as a pride point in my family. See, that was a part of the greatest difficulty. Is here I was, a New Orleans boy, playing for the New Orleans Saints. And my entire family rallied around this point. I was the first kid in my family to go to college, the first kid in my family to finish college. And not only did I finish college, but now I'm an NFL player on top of that. And so all of my family members were hanging on to the fact that I was rewriting the family narrative through what I could, produce. And it sunk me. I remember going up to my parents' upstairs bedroom, and I didn't get to finish telling you this story at the beginning, Matthew. I had a dog, his name was Titus. I had had him since college, a boxer. He actually passed away here in Atlanta a few years ago. He's buried on the Beltline. And I haven't been able to bring myself to get another dog because that guy got me through so much. He even chased off a crazy girlfriend for me one time, just out of instinct, I mean, it was incredible. She was getting loud and he was like, arr, and she was like, get him off me. And I'm like, hey, that's your problem, right? And I went upstairs and I turned off all the lights in my parents' upstairs bedroom. And I sat there with my boy Titus, and I just cried. And I thought after one good cry, okay, that I'd be fine. But I wasn't fine. And one day turned into 2, turned into 4, turned into weeks of absolute morbid depression, where I didn't want to eat. I was hardly sleeping. I was hardly functioning. My mother's a developmental psychologist, which meant that I had many, many uncomfortable conversations as a child that only gave me ammunition for wooing women later in life that I would then have to repent for when I became a Christian. And she was freaking out because she thought I was suicidal. And I never thought about taking my life. I just didn't want to live life because I could not imagine life as not being Leonce Crump Jr., number 90 for the New Orleans Saints, or for some team, somewhere, where I could show the world that I was worthy, that I had value, that I had something to add to the human narrative. And this went on for months and months and months and months. I did not work. I did not move forward in any regard. And several months down the road, one of my old coaches called me, and that's actually my wrestling coach, who tried to derail my football career. That's another story for another purpose on tap. And he was, early in my life, one of the most selfish, greedy people I'd ever known. And I was a commodity to him, and my talent was going to get him his results. But something had happened to him. After destroying his life through divorce and other things, he had come to know Jesus, and it had completely transformed him. And I don't know why he called me. It was really out of the blue. I don't know if he saw ESPN and saw that my NFL career had been derailed. This is a total kind of a tangent that I skipped over. But what made this worse is 1 month before that, I just told you this, I had been at Oklahoma University, and they had honored me as a dual sport athlete who'd made it. And now here I am being cut on freaking television for the whole world to see. So maybe he saw that. We've never talked about it. I don't know why he called, but he called me. And I don't know why I answered, but I did. And he asked me how I was doing. And of course, I tried to BS him, you know. I'm doing fine, you know, life is good, trying to figure out my next steps. Next steps, yeah, I just got cut from the Saints. And I don't know what I'm gonna do next. And I may be going to St. Louis, but I don't know how that's gonna work out. And he said something to me I'd never really thought about in my life. He said, Leonce, son, you are not the sum of what you produce. Can I say that again? You are not the sum of what you produce. The measure of your worth is not tied to what you make, what you have, how well you're known, how far you've gotten in procuring for yourself the American dream. That your value is not in your athletic ability. It is not in your academic achievement. It is not in having your name etched in a wall at Oklahoma University, and it is not in having your name on the back of a jersey for any team in the NFL. That is not who you are. That is what you do. And the reason why you're spiraling right now, the reason why you're depressed right now, the reason why you can't function right now, the reason why you feel like your life is over right now is because you have conflated what you do with who you are. And what you produce has become your identity. And you've allowed yourself to believe the lie that the measure of a man is what he can provide and what he can produce. And that is not the measure of a man. And that is not the fullness of your worth. He said, I'm praying for you. And if you need anything at all, you let me know. But that conversation sent me on a journey to really begin asking the question, excuse me, if I had in fact allowed myself to believe that narrative, that I am only as worthy as what I can create, that I'm only as worthy as how many zeros are in my bank account, that I'm only as worthy as how well I'm known, that I'm only as worthy as how accurately I redirect my family narrative, that I'm only as worthy as what I'm able to produce. And I had. Now I know I've got just a few minutes here, yeah?
We keep going, we're all awake.
Okay. I just want to make sure. I've got a few fights to have after this, so I want to leave time for that. For the booers, yet to be identified. All right, Michael. That's my new buddy. But it sent me on a journey. And if you guys don't mind, I want to share with you from the scriptures one of the things that freed me from believing that my value in this world was tied to what I could create, produce, make in it. And it's from an underrated part of the scriptures called Ecclesiastes. And here's how it reads. It says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. I'm in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, for those of you who are writing notes. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and it hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and it goes around to the north, and around goes the wind. And on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, and a man cannot utter it. Here's the part. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Let me tell you what that means. You see, when I first started looking into this little passage, I thought vanity of vanities meant emptiness, that everything is empty, everything is vain, it's all worthless anyway. But that's not what it meant. The word hebel actually means meaning. And it's not meaningless, it's meaningful, meaningful. And so if everything is meaningful, then there has to be a first cause. That's what they would say in science. In order to give something meaning, there has to be a source. There has to be a catalyst. There has to be something from which meaning is drawn. And then the teacher goes through these cycles, using nature as an illustration to say that the sun can only go in the path that it was made to go. And every stream eventually ends up in a bigger body of water. And the wind may seem to go nowhere, but it's actually circulating right back to where it started. And there is nothing new under the sun. And all of the toil with which we toil under some blind desire to make something new under the sun. Are you tracking with me? To make something that will give us some sense of value or worth. Well, it's already been done before. And because all has meaning, and because all has purpose, and because all has design, then it is not what you do and produce and toil for that actually gives you that meaning. It is the fact that you have a source from which you came and to which you will return. A source that has shaped and formed your identity with great intentionality. A source that, of course, the Bible says is God, that has actually made you and me, men, in his very image. So that what we do is not the sum of who we are, but who we are becomes the source of what we do. And when who we are becomes the source of what we do, then when we fail, and when it doesn't come together, and when we find ourselves embarrassed, and when we find ourselves at a loss, because what we hoped to produce and where we hoped to be and what we hoped to grasp did not come together, we will not be sent down a spiral of questioning whether we are worthy to the world. Because we have a source that has already told us that we have meaning by simply existing. Because in existing, we know that it is not incidental, but in fact we have been made. And like the sun, and like the wind, and like the streams, one day we will return to that very source. And the goal between now and then is to live in light of that identity, so that when we produce and what we produce is not the sum of who we are, but who we are because of who our source is becomes the energy behind what we do. So that when what we do fails or succeeds, we are not rattled and we are not prideful, because we know that our meaning is actually derived from who made us and how he made us, and not from what we are actually able to make ourselves. And that, brothers, that is what delivered me from a depressive spiral that made me believe that because I was no longer an NFL player, because I was no longer a top producing, top performing athlete, that I no longer had anything to give to the world. Now, I'm gonna wrap up with this just so that you know. This thing is so insidious that it's not just about football. You see, once I got in the ministry, that same thing started chattering in my ear, right? I've got to preach it better than Louis and Craig Oliver, and I've got to grow it bigger than Andy, right? And I got to have more swag than anybody in the city. Now that's just undeniable. But it is so insidious that even when we're doing the good thing for which we've been made, that if we're not careful, that too will become the source of our identity rather than in outworking of who we know ourselves to be, which is uniquely, fearfully, and wonderfully made to do in this world what only we can do, not because it defines us, but because we've already been defined. Yeah?
Yes.
And so I hope you're encouraged by that. That when you leave here, I don't know what you do, whether you're gonna try to do PT or whether you already, I mean, there's a couple of y'all, you got a couple zeros behind your name, and that's great. There's a church in downtown that could use your generosity. Trying to buy a new building right now. But no matter what it is, you'll leave here, I hope, secure first in who you are, so that you can actually have joy in what you do. Because whether you win or whether you lose, you are no less the man that you were at the start of the journey than you will be at the end. Yeah? Thank you guys for the time. Yeah. Okay. I'm being instructed to take some questions.
What's your max bench press?
Where did that come from? My max bench press. Well, are we saying 3 rep max or 1 rep max? How many reps at the combine? I didn't do a combine. I did a private workout because I didn't go through the draft. And I did 32 reps of 225. Yeah. So again, with the booze. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the brother asked, are there any warning signs when I feel myself slipping into making my identity what I do, rather than remembering who I am because of who made me and how I'm made? Can I ask it that way? Yeah, there are. One of the primary warning signs for me is that I begin to overwork and I stop resting. You know, there's a reason that even Jesus rested. Like, that's something I remind myself of. Even Jesus rested, right? And if we believe that Jesus is who he said he was, then he was God and man. And he was like, hey, I got to get a nap. So if Jesus needed a nap, then perhaps I do too. Americans, and American men in particular, are some of the most overworked people in the world. And we don't know how to rest because our whole life is built around productivity. And so when I find myself pushing the boundaries on my hours, making excuses for why I don't have time for my family or for my friends, when I find myself waking up incredibly early, and then staying out incredibly late because I gotta finish this project, I gotta get these numbers together, I gotta make sure this series is ready, I gotta write this study guide, I gotta finish this book, I gotta finish this second book, and I start pulling away the rhythms that actually help me stay healthy and rest. So, my gym time goes away, my martial arts time goes away, my prayer time goes away. I only read the Bible to prep for sermons rather than actually reading it to satisfy my soul. When those little things start to happen, I know right away that I am leaning in once again to identifying myself by what I produce rather than understanding who I am and letting that be the source of what I produce. So I think a lack of rest is a big red flag. I think in unredemptive competitiveness is a big red flag. So, we laughed about it, but I had a 3-hour meeting with Louis, and I left that meeting. I love him so much, one of the coolest old men I've ever known. And I left that meeting super encouraged. And then a day later, it's like, man, we got to catch up with passion. No, I don't. I don't have to catch up with passion. We may never catch up with passion. We may never, and that's okay. But when I start thinking those thoughts and my mentors and my friends or just people in the city who are doing good work become my competition, then I know I'm drifting into that false identity. Does that make sense? Also isolation for me. When I start isolating myself, I know I'm headed to a bad place because men were made for community. And so when, if you start isolating, you're either in a bad place or you're headed to a bad place. Yes, sir. He asked how what I learned through wrestling helped me through life, just sheer tenacity. Wrestling is the hardest sport in the world, period. Football was a breeze. I used to actually, when we did long distance runs, I would run with the receivers. And they're like, what is the defensive lineman doing up here running with the receivers? Like, well, because I wrestled a man's sport. And so, football was just a cherry on top. But I think tenacity, being able to endure setbacks and suffering. I'll never forget because I wanted to be a party boy. And that's a third purpose on tap. All right, because I wanted to be a party boy, I let my grades drop real bad my junior year, and I became academically ineligible. And my coach, because he's a crazy man, was intent on punishing me every day of that academic ineligibility. And so one day I showed up to the wrestling room, and I thought I'd just be on the bike or something like that, but he had decided I was going to run steps that day. It was wintertime in Oklahoma, so it was about 18 degrees outside. And all I had was shorts and a t-shirt. And he said, yeah, you're going to run the stadium steps. And I said, all I got is shorts and a t-shirt. And he said, well, you become a man today. And I ran the entire stadium at Oklahoma University. I snaked the whole thing in shorts and a t-shirt. Those kinds of things rewire you. And so facing adversity, facing setbacks, I really think sport has helped me to be able to navigate those things well, not always healthily. And I parse those things out. So can I make it through? Yes. Is it always with a healthy frame of mind? No. And that's where I got to reset, even based on what we talked about tonight. Sir, and then sir.
Jesus was perhaps the most humble man who ever walked the earth.
Yes, sir.
I have the privilege of encouraging college students as they are about to interview for their first professional responsibilities. Interviews scare people a lot.
Yes, sir.
How would you counsel a college senior around combining the responsibility to remain humble at the same time that you're sharing your capabilities with a recruiter?
What a great question. I would counsel them, first of all, not to focus on what they've accomplished, to know the story of the organization, and to offer in humble ways that they believe they might be able to contribute to the goal of the organization rather than just sitting there and promoting themselves. Because now you put yourself into that narrative, and so everything that you say is related to the furtherance of others rather than just to boasting about your degrees, your accomplishments, your whatever, your value to the organization. And so it reframes the conversation. I think there's a way to humbly talk about what it is that you bring to the table without putting yourself at the center of the narrative. And so that'd be the primary way I would counsel them, is to say, don't put yourself at the center of the narrative, put the organization at the center of the narrative, and then make yourself a tributary, as I would say it, a tributary into that stream, and help them to see how what you want to do is see the organization succeed, to see that vision come to fruition, to see that strategy activated in every environment that you can, and not just brag about everything that you've done and why they should want you so bad.
So if I can summarize, I came to serve, not to be served.
You know, I think a guy named Jesus said that. That's one of my favorite parables, by the way. One of my favorite parables. And you know Peter was the one to speak up, right? Jesus is like, who's the greatest among them? And Peter's like, the people popping bottles at the table, you know? And Jesus is like, I'm among you as one who serves. So yes, I came to serve the ends of the organization, not to serve myself. Yes, sir.
So, being a professional football player, being a professional athlete, even in college, you kind of had to compartmentalize your life into different aspects. And now you're a father of 4 children, and you're a husband, and I'm sure, I don't know if you have a family, but you have a father, brother, sister, essentially. How do you kind of put all of those things together and still complete the goals that you set for yourself and remain a source of inspiration for people that are around you?
Yeah. When I'm working well, right? The primary way that I do that is really the heart of everything we talked about already, is making sure that they see that my identity is not rooted in their approval. It is not rooted in providing for them. It is not rooted in their celebrating me. It is not rooted in anything other than who God says I am and who He has made me. And then I am better. The more that I am able to identify with who God says I am as an image bearer of Him, as a son of God, according to Ephesians chapter 1, the more that I'm able to identify with that, the better I am in all of those arenas and in all of those avenues. The second thing that I would add to that is several years ago, I realized that balance is a farce. There's no such thing as balance. Okay, balance denotes tension. Think about that, right? Because it requires tension to keep two things in balance. And there's no such thing. Life is lived in rhythm. And being able to communicate effectively and clearly to my wife, to my children, to my brother, who's a naval intel officer. So again, to those who booed me, he can erase your identity. But life is lived in rhythm. And so being able to communicate effectively to my wife and to my children and say, this is a rhythm where we're going to be in a bit of a sprint season. And I'm going to be busier than normal. And there's a few things that honestly, just to accomplish the things I know that I'm supposed to do, I'm going to have to run a little harder in this season. But then there are seasons where I know I don't have to. And if I can fight my ambition and my achievement urges and my American mentality, then there are extensive seasons where I know I can work 25 or 30 hours a week and give the rest to my family. I know that. Now, when I'm working well, I do that. When I'm working poorly, I find 30 hours of work to do that I don't even need to be doing because I'm so addicted to productivity. And so realizing that life comes in rhythm, not balance, and making sure that I am secure in who I know that I am and who God has made me allows me to live in all those spheres as my fullest self. I think the only thing I would add to that, on top of that, is making sure that my family gets the very best of me. Not conferences. I'm on 4 or 5 boards. I'm leading a larger than average church. I'm writing a book. None of those things should get the best of me. My wife, my 4 children, my mother and father, who've been married 46 years, somehow without killing each other, and my brother, they should get the best of me. And then everybody else gets the gap between what I'm doing and the margin that I need to create, right? And when I'm doing that, It doesn't matter how many spheres I'm in, all of them are getting the very best that I could give to it. Does that make sense? So my wife and I started Renovation Church in my living room in 2010 with 3 people. And since then, surely because of the grace of the Lord, that church has grown to over 1,000 people in the last 7.5 years. And it's been an incredible journey. It's really been fantastic. Our church is made up of about 30 different ethnicities. We have different socioeconomic groups, so we have a couple Hawks players that drop in here and there, and a couple Falcons players. A guy named Lecrae has been with our church for the last 5 or 6 years. And then we have literal homeless people that are part of our church, and they come every Sunday. And we only got one rule. If you're going to bathe in the sink, it's got to be before 8 a.m. And they do that. And so we have really worked to create an environment that is a reflection of what we call God's creative genius. We don't want assimilation. I want you to come in. There's a guy here named Brecht. Is that right? Where are you at, Brecht? Did I see a Brecht? You had a beautiful head of hair, and it was swept perfectly. And there was some chest hair sprouting out. I don't know where you went. But when I saw you, I thought to myself, that is the ultimate white man. And I want him at our church. I don't know where he went. Is that, well, no, that's not you. I'm gonna find you. I know you're out there. But I was telling my friend Michael, I want that guy at my church. And I want my friend Junebug at my church, who has a row of gold teeth across the front of his mouth. And we have Nepalese exchange students from Georgia Tech at our church, and Korean students, and Koreans who grew up here in Duluth. So we have really fought to create an environment where we can be family and not have to unseat the unique way that God has made us. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And out of that, we've planted churches all over the world, in Brazil, in the UK, in Pretoria, South Africa, in Australia, in a little burg called Camden, New Jersey, AKA the armpit of America. So God has been very kind to us in that, and it's a beautiful thing. And we're in downtown Atlanta at the corner of Piedmont and Ralph McGill for now. Our building is actually for sale right now, and we're looking to make a move to Doraville to get a little more space and a little more parking, and touch a few more people from different places. He asked, what are some of my go-to scriptures that speak to my heart as a man? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. The summary of that verse of scripture is that you are a unique masterpiece made by master craftsmen and given a master work to do in this world before time began. Colossians 3:11, now therefore there is no Greek or Jew, slave or free, barbarian or Scythian, but Christ is all and in all. Revelation 21, 1 through 6. Those are all places that really encourage me, and then the entire book of Ecclesiastes. There's one verse I go back to all the time to remind myself of who I am outside of the love of Jesus and the rescue that he's done in my life. And it's in Ecclesiastes, I believe chapter 8, either chapter 6 or chapter 8. But if you read the whole book, you won't be sad. But the teacher there says, God made man upright, but he devises many schemes. And I'm like, man, does that not describe us? And everything around it, of course, is incredibly encouraging, but it was so cogent to describe kind of the human condition, that God made us in a beautiful way. But when we get to devising our own schemes, that's when we get in trouble. Sweet. Sir.
What do you know today that you didn't know 1 year ago?
Good gracious. That I'm not as good as I thought I was. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm good once, as I ever was. Yes, sir.
I want to understand how your family, kids, have shaped you as a man.
Yeah.
Being, coming from wrestling and being an athlete, right? We get a mindset, we become this person. How's that really helped you evolve?
Yeah, I'll tell you a brief story if I have time. Do I have time? Okay, I'm on your clock and drinking your beer. So, and this is public knowledge now, and she doesn't take offense to it. But I didn't want daughters. I actually prayed not to have daughters. Because before Jesus, I don't know if you can imagine this, but I had many nicknames. Big Red Silky. Looking up Ecclesiastes, it's all right. They used to call me Big Red Silky, call me Cat Daddy. I was bad in these streets. That's the best way to say that. And so I didn't want girls. And I'm like, Lord, please, because I know what's out there. I'm out there. Somewhere, a younger version of me is out there. And his mother was a developmental psychologist, and he knows how people work. And he is a predator. And of course, my first kid is a girl. And I accepted that. And then my second kid was a girl. And I would say if there's anything that they've done to profoundly shape me, is one, taught me what it means to really depend on the Lord. I can't live in fear that my girls are going to be swept away by some predatory psychopath like I was before I got saved. And I have to be intentional in raising them to recognize those things. But one of the primary things that they did to transform me in a way that I've evolved is I've become far more tender. As a matter of fact, I was speaking at a conference about fatherhood. And one of the things that I shared with the men there is, God in his sovereignty and his providence, he didn't give me a son first for a reason. I would have broken. I would have broken my son had he been my eldest, because I was 25 years old, and fresh out of the NFL, locked into that mentality, and I would have put all the weight of my successes and my failures on the back of that little boy. And so what did he give me? He gave me two girls who are about as interested in sports as I am in cross-stitching, which means not at all. And as a matter of fact, my eldest is not even athletic at all. And she's tall, and she's lean, and she's long, and all she wants to do is draw and sing and make stuff. And so my entire mentality had to shift around how I would connect with these girls, because we had no natural connection point. And it fundamentally transformed me. So then, fast forward several years later, I have a son, and now I'm a different father for him. And I'm tender with him, and I'm sweet with him. Our sons need our affection, not just our direction. He needs to rough house. Every day, I know I'm gonna get headbutted right in the nuts. I know it's gonna happen. I come in the house, and he comes down the hallway full speed, and he goes, Daddy! Whoo! And I'm like, oh my God. I'm glad I'm done having children, right? Every day. But my son needs me to kiss him. He needs me to tell him I love him. He wants to cuddle. He needs cuddle time with Dad as much as he needs wrestle time with Dad. And so that has fundamentally shifted me and evolved my mentality. And then of course my wife has just done a beautiful job of discipling me through my inefficiencies. Are there any Enneagram fans here? Okay, so I'm an Enneagram 8, if you couldn't tell. For those of you who don't know what that means, you should go do the Enneagram. But my wife is a 4, which is almost a polar opposite, or 6 rather, which is almost a polar opposite of an 8. And the way that the Enneagram fleshes out is you have a primary score, and then they tell you if you're resourceful or not resourceful in that area, which means do you use it or do you not use it, and do you use it for good or do you use it for bad? So my 6, which is called the loyal person, which are sweet people, okay, sweet people who are people. My 6, the score was a 10 out of 100, okay, a 10. But my resourceful score was a 70 because my wife has discipled me in being more nurturing, even as, you know, I put on my front about being a hard ass. Oh, I mean a hard butt. So yes, lots of evolution. Tucker said we got time for one more. Yes, sir?
What's your favorite book and why?
Oh man, you're gonna make me say the Bible. Besides the Bible, Nelson Mandela's autobiography, A Long Walk to Freedom. He was one of the most complex, beautifully made human beings that may have ever existed. I love his autobiography. I love his assessment of humanity. I love his hopefulness. So here's what Nelson Mandela did that maybe we've missed, especially for those of you who are younger. So he suffered miserably under apartheid. And when he came out of jail, there were a lot of brown folks. So in South Africa, just so the brothers in here know, if they call you colored, it's not the same, okay? We are not black in South Africa because we're not African. So it's black, colored, and white. And so the colored and the black folks, when he got elected president, expected for him to like punish the provocateurs of apartheid. And instead, he sought unity and reconciliation. And the resolve that that takes, and the mentality that that takes, after not only have you suffered under apartheid, but you suffered such that you were jailed, separated from your family, lost your wife, your children grew up without you, and still your chief desire is to see South Africa united as one people. It is remarkable, and it is Christ-like at another level. So that is my favorite book besides the Bible. And I would highly recommend it. It's about 500 plus pages. So if you're not a reader, audible.com, it'll hook you up. But I do think that everybody should read that book because it changed me. It changed me in some fundamental ways. Sweet. Sure. Thank you, yeah.
That was fantastic. Exactly what we were looking for. Hope you guys got something out of that. You know, we all probably heard one or two things that maybe resonated really well with us. And one of the things that he shared tonight is we were made for community. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But as guys, a lot of times we rebuff that.
Yeah, we do.
We're not real sure. We're not real sure that's what we want to do. But that's the way God made us, and that's something that I want to just. Man, if I could, that's my heartbeat, exactly what he's saying. If I could encourage you guys to do anything. Some of you guys are involved in groups, you've got something that you're a part of. If you do not have something that you're a part of, Friday mornings at the Lodge, which is right across from Peachtree Press, there's about 40 guys that gather there that look a lot like you sitting around here. And if you do not have a place to go, I encourage you to come and join us there. You are more than welcome. We start at 7 o'clock, maybe 7:15, kind of depends on what time you roll in. And we always roll out of there by about 8 o'clock. So if you don't know where the Lodge is, if you have questions about it, let me know. I'll be happy to give you some information about that. But that's what we were made for. And
That's
you're
right.
exactly right. That's what
right.
we were made for. Let's give him one more.